We're starting these players this week. We're going to draft them in the order that we would start them, and I'm going to go first because last time I let you go first, you took my guy. So I'm going to actually go Rashad White here. This is a guy that consistently over the course of the season, we've actually been cautious to start. We were actually a little bit cautious about drafting him at times in the offseason at least. There were also times where we liked his price. But Rashad White, there's one glaring statistic here that I look at, and I'm like, yeah, that makes me want to, because you do remember he played three best run defenses in the NFL 3 weeks in a row. Yeah. But and actually performed a little bit against Atlanta, which is great. But it was because if you look at his reception totals in the last 4 games, 4 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets, and 4 receptions. And actually he converted on every single one of those targets but one of them, which is insane. Yeah. But he's been getting an average, and even the yardage in his last 3 games, his receiving yardage, 65 yards, 70 yards, 46 yards. I mean, guys, we're talking like 9 to 10 points baseline from receptions only. So to me, when I see that, I'm like, even from a running back, I'm like, okay, he's a safe start. And when he does have weeks where he's scoring touchdowns, even in multiples, like you saw last week against Houston, 28 points. I'm comfortable. I mean, I'm actually surprised that I am, but I am very comfortable starting Rashad White. When you look at the Titans' last 4 games, they've been giving up quite a bit of points to running backs. And to me, this has 2 things. Number one, this Titans defense is not the Titans defense we normally see from a running standpoint, because usually we're like, yeah, we're avoiding this defense. This year, I don't really think they are. And when you're looking at the production from the individual guys in the last couple of games, it's fairly good. Rashad White even proved he could perform against top rushing defenses. Now, what are they going to do against somebody that's actually not a premier rushing defense in the NFL? Rashad White has the 5th highest snap percentage for running backs in the entire league. So
that surprised me.
And so not only, I know, because coming into the season, we would have expected them to at least bring somebody. That's why a lot of people were drafting Sean Tucker in like the 18th round of best ball drafts.
Yeah.
It's because we were expecting somebody to come in there and at least take some of that away. And he really has gotten like bell cow workload.
He's just taking it all. And he's not even that efficient. But what I care about most is the fact that he's such an effective receiving back with a average to below average quarterback. Like, I like any running back situation with an average to below average quarterback if they have receiving upside. And he just happens to be the perfect situation for Rashad White. So I love it.
I think it's very safe. I think the receiving upside is great, and it gives you a good floor. So he's going to be my number 1 start for this week.
Yeah. My number 1 start, or I guess our number 2 start overall.
But you're number 1, but our number 2.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Tyler Lockett here. And I mean, if you're looking at the trend over the last 4 weeks where, you know, he has a good game week 6, not good 7, good game week 8, not so good week 9. I mean, if that trend is going to continue, I guess he's going to have a good week in week 10. But when you're looking at the matchup, it's like almost, I don't want to say a sure thing, but it looks like it's pretty much a sure thing. The Commanders have the 4th highest points given up to wide receivers. And on top of that, they no longer have the pass rush that they had when they had Chase Young and Montez Sweat, who were both traded away at the deadline. So I think you're going to see these points go up for wide receivers and just the fantasy production overall against the Washington Commanders without those top 2 guys, because, I mean, you're going to be able to run all over that defensive line. You're going to be able to pass and have a lot more time because you're not going to be under pressure as much. So I'm super comfortable with it. And the wide receivers, the fantasy points that they have scored in PPR over the last 4 weeks, 65 against Philadelphia, Washington allowed. 59 against Denver.
The Broncos, guys.
Then they played Philly. Then they played Philly again, 55 points, and Chicago, 49 points. That was the Justin Fields-led Chicago Bears. So you're looking at a team that is much, much better than Denver and Chicago, who, from a passing game perspective, like a weapons perspective, are very effective, not quite to the Eagles level, but I mean, they're up there. I'd say top 10 in weapons. And
oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd say top 6.
Yeah, and Gino Smith, I mean, look for a guy to have another bounce back as well. I mean, this really helps Gino Smith in addition to Tyler Lockett, but I'm really excited. Tyler Lockett, down week, 6 points against Baltimore, but he still had 8 targets. I'm not worried about the volume. I'm not worried about the production. I think the Ravens are just that good.
I agree with you, and they kind of proved that this week. It was that was insane to me. I was shocked by that result.
Couldn't believe it.
I'm going to go with RAAndre Stevenson here.
Nice.
There's really just one reason, and that reason is shaped like a horseshoe. I mean, look, I know the Colts are actually performing at a decent level right now.
A 500 level.
And I know Jim Irsay was dancing in the locker room after the win.
That was the best
to Meek
thing
Mill.
I've ever
that
seen.
was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Did you see him holding?
He was like holding his finger.
It was like that was so awesome.
I couldn't. That was the one thing that I like watched it a second time. I was like, hang on, I need to see this again. And I had to see like Steichen's face because he was like,
I literally didn't even watch any of the players. I was just watching his finger, and I was like,
so
what is happening? If you haven't seen the video, go watch it. RAAndre Stevenson in his last 4 games, 18 points, 14.7 points, and 22 points. He's been getting 55 to 65% of snaps. So Ezekiel Elliott obviously getting some of that as well. But when you're looking at his targets, again, looking at the targets in the last 4 games, 6 targets, 6 targets, 4 targets, 6 targets. That is going to make for a pretty good floor. You're playing a Colts team that has a below average run defense right now, mainly because Grover Stewart, who is one of the best run stoppers in the NFL on the defensive line, is suspended at the moment for violating the
4 more games.
It was the PED thing. That's a huge loss for the Colts. Take it from somebody who watches every single one of their games. That is a giant loss. And when you're looking at some of the production that the Colts have given up to running back in the last couple games, I mean, Kyron Williams torched them. Derrick Henry torched them. Travis Etienne torched them. Jerome Ford even had some big runs against them.
Kareem Hunt as well.
Yep. Alvin Kamara. And
Chuba Hubbard. In PPR, granted it was PPR, he had some nice receiving upside there, but the running backs in Carolina's offense scored 21 points total against the Colts run defense. That's pretty bad. That is not good for the Colts defense. So with RAAndre Stevenson, yes, some people are going to say, well, his production really came from one breakaway run against Washington. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it did.
13 of the 23 points. So.
Right. So, I mean, that's more than half.
Yeah,
that is quite a bit.
But he got 8 points from the receiving game.
Yeah,
so
6 targets, 4 receptions, 42 yards. Look for that receiving usage to go up in against a defense that, I mean, their passing game isn't very good. They're not going to. I just don't trust them to keep RAAndre from producing.
I think what would potentially kill this pick is if Ezekiel Elliott got the red zone touches and had 2 touchdowns this game. That being said, the Colts have given up the 5th most points to running backs this year. So I think it's a good matchup from a team standpoint. I think RAAndre's been getting a good amount of targets to raise his floor. So I'm comfortable starting him again. I'm going to take RAAndre here.
Yep. Next guy I'm going to take here is going to be Christian Kirk. I'm a big fan of Christian Kirk. We've been a big fan of him for a long time. And I feel like any week, which is pretty rare, that Christian Kirk doesn't put up more than 10 points, people are automatically a downer on him, while simultaneously being low on Calvin Ridley now, who they were just obsessed with. Like, Christian Kirk is kind of entering that always a buy territory. He's not quite Chris Godwin level yet, but he's getting there. Last 4 weeks, 14 points against Buffalo, 13 against Indy, 19 against New Orleans. Super consistent, very reliable, and then only 8 points against the Pittsburgh Steelers secondary, which is pretty solid. And offensively, the Jags just didn't look very good that week anyways.
They don't look like they don't know what they're doing sometimes.
Yeah, as good as the 49ers defense is or has appeared to be through the first half of the season, they have allowed the 5th highest fantasy points given up to wide receivers. And when you're looking at that matchup for Christian Kirk specifically, I think you're going to have the top corners in the secondary obviously going to be focused on Calvin Ridley. Correct. And focus on keeping Travis Etienne from getting a big play and scoring a touchdown and getting a 75-yard reception like he did last game. It's infuriating when he does that. But Christian Kirk, I mean, he just from a schematic perspective is always the afterthought, which makes him so good for fantasy because he's so good in his own right as an NFL wide receiver. The fantasy points given up against the 49ers defense: Jordan Addison, 31 points. Puka Nacua, 30. Michael Wilson, 26. Jamar Chase, 25. Marquise Brown, 16. You go all the way down this list. I mean, the floor is Brandon Powell with 10 points. So you insert a guy like Christian Kirk who gets consistent volume, who gets consistent targets, very reliable. That's not only a super safe floor. I think that's a recipe for a high ceiling as well.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to the Seahawks, and I'm going to take Gino Smith here. Gino Smith, a lot of people are going to be like, are you kidding me? Are you absolutely kidding me? Because Gino Smith on the season is the quarterback 22, and you look at his last game against Baltimore, and he had 3.68 points. Are you kidding me, Avery? No, I'm not kidding you. Let's look at some of the quarterbacks that have played the Ravens this season. Here are the top 3 quarterback performances from a fantasy perspective against the Baltimore Ravens this season. Joshua Dobbs had 25 points. He had a great game.
Garbage time. It was garbage time points.
Joe Burrow had 16, and Gardner Minshew had 13. Those are the top 3.
That is insane.
They've been very good at not giving up points to quarterbacks. That defense is, in my opinion, good enough to get them to the AFC Championship game. And when you're looking at the Commanders on the flip side, this secondary is bad. Let's look at the quarterbacks against Commanders this year. Justin Fields had 33. That is Justin Fields. Jalen Hurts had 27. Russell Wilson had 26. Jalen Hurts had 24. Josh Allen had 22. Tyrod Taylor had 21. Desmond Ridder had 20.
Desmond Ridder.
I mean, I don't really feel like you also have to take into account that
the bye week
is going to kill some people. You've got Patrick Mahomes out on bye. You've got Stafford. If he were to play, he would be on bye. Tua's on bye, and Jalen Hurts. I think Gino, in a week where there are lots of byes, coming off a game where the team that they played does a very good job against opposing quarterbacks, I think he's a must-start for me this week.
Yeah, completely agree there. And the next start that I'm going to have here, a must-start, will be Dalton Schultz.
Yeah,
and even though Dalton Schultz screwed us a couple weeks ago with only 2.5 points against Carolina, I don't think anyone who actually watched that game went away from that game and really took anything away from it at all. Yeah. I think he kind of just wanted to move on. Be like, okay, that was just one of those disgusting games that we never, ever, ever want to see again, and said nothing about the quarterback play of either one on either offense.
Right.
And the production was like, okay, whatever. When you take that game away, I mean, against Atlanta in week 5, Dalton Schultz, 10 targets, 19 points. New Orleans, very good defense, 7 targets, 16 points. And then he has 11 targets for 10 receptions, 130 yards, and a touchdown for 27 points against Tampa Bay. This is
CJ Stroud.
We all just really want to thank him and the amount of fantasy producing assets that he supports in a singular offense. I mean, I feel like literally everyone that went off in that game, when you throw for 5 touchdowns and almost 500 yards,
everybody's going to have 20 points.
That's going to happen. I don't think that's going to be the numbers that he puts up again this week, but I do think, and I will stand by, Dalton Schultz being, in my opinion, one of the top 2 options there. It can be your choice between Tank Dell and Nico Collins. I personally think it's Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz as the most reliable, most consistent fantasy options there if you're going to really rely on anyone. And I like the matchup here, especially against the Cincinnati Bengals, who have allowed the most points given up to tight ends this year.
I saw a tweet, and it was like, how do you pronounce Bengals? And it was Bengals, and Bengals. Or, yeah, Bengals.
What did I say?
I think you did say Bengals.
It's the Bengals, yeah.
Yeah, which we're saying, but they're saying it's technically Bengals.
It's like Bengals. What?
That's one of them. 45% said Bengals, and another like 55% said it the right, which is Bengals, which sounds really weird. But I know, and like Bengals was at like 5%. Everybody in Indiana says Bengals. I know it for a fact. I've heard it time and time again. Rabbit trail.
It's like everybody's saying Louisville, but it's actually Louisville. If you really know,
it's actually Louisville.
It's Louisville. Speaking of Bengals, I think that Dalton Schultz after this, I think he's going to go out with a bang with this game, and that he's going to score. I think he'll score a touchdown. I mean, with the amount of production that the Bengals have allowed to tight ends, I think you got to count on it. I think his snap share and his opportunity is very reliable, pretty consistent, and I'm not really worried about him at all. I think ultimately he's going to be at least a top 5 option as a tight end this week.
Yeah.
Especially with the bye weeks.
I love going first because I can stick you with the guy neither of us wants.
Nice.
I'm going to go DeAndre Hopkins here. DeAndre Hopkins in his last 3 games, because he had a bye, 3 points and then 34 points against Atlanta, and 10 points. But those are the 2 games that Will Levis has played. And so if 10 points is going to be his floor, I'm good with that.
Yep.
Not to mention, when you're looking at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who is their matchup, they've given up the 2nd most points to wide receiver this year. The only to, surprisingly, the Philadelphia Eagles. Would not have guessed that coming into the season, but that's how it has turned out.
Solid.
Titans wide receivers with Will Levis, stats on the screen, a lot better. Why? Because Will Levis actually can throw, which when you're talking about quarterback play is fairly important. There's not a whole lot of statistical stuff I want to go into there. I do want to mention, although he only had 10 targets against Pittsburgh, he only had 10 points. He had 11 targets. That's really good. I love that. It was never going to be week 8 every week. But week 9, that's sustainable. Yep. I'm going to count on that, and I'll go DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, I don't really care what your opinion is on Will Levis, the player, and as an NFL talent. I think we just all owe him a big thank you, William Levis, for breathing life into the fantasy production of this offense, because we needed it. We were desperate for it. D-Hop, man, I hope he helps us out towards the end of the year while we're making a playoff push. I'm stuck with the last guy here, Naji Harris. And the reason he's going to be the last guy is because, I mean, how reliable has he really been, and has he exceeded, or has he met expectations, the ones that we had for him going into the season? No, not even close. He's been absolutely horrible, but not so much the last few weeks. He's actually been all right. He's gotten some nice volume, 14 carries in week 7, 16 in week 9. Yeah, he only had 7 in week 8 against Jacksonville. Again, that was kind of a real gross, disgusting game. It was a messy game too. I think it was super rainy, and the field was horrible. He did have 5 targets in that game though, which helped him out, helped him get 10 points in that game. I mean, he's really shown that he has a nice floor if they keep utilizing him like this. And he's honestly been a lot more effective in the way that they've utilized him as well. So it's promising to see. I think ultimately you're not looking at Naji Harris and expecting him to ever meet the expectations that you may have had for him going into the season. For those of you who are believers in Naji Harris, like us. Which is so bad because we didn't even like him to play. We just liked his fantasy upside.
Correct.
But they're playing the Packers defense, the Packers run defense, 9th highest points given up to running backs this season. Any running back that is matched up against the Packers defense and Joe Barry, I am all over that week. I want to start that guy. Like, no joke. If it were Madison, if it were Chuba Hubbard, I'd be comfortable with it. Like, I'd want to start anyone. Naji Harris is no exception here, and he does have some nice receiving upside, which results in a really good floor. The over-under, have you seen the over-under that game?
I'm guessing it's low.
38.
Yeah.
That's disgusting. That's absolutely disgusting. And with the luck that Deontay Johnson has and never scoring touchdowns, and the fact that George Pickens can't do anything once Deontay Johnson is back, I think you got to assume that the touchdowns are going to be Naji Harris's or Jaylen Warren's, and I would probably bet on Naji Harris.
Yeah,
so
totally agree. Yeah. All right, if you play fantasy football, please subscribe for us. Drop a like on this video to help conquer the algorithm. We really appreciate you doing those 2 things for us. Head over to flockfantasy.com/domain for our rest of season rankings if you want those as you make your playoff push. We appreciate you guys watching. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you later.